Supposing anyone was to ask me what, in my opinion, was the best and cheapest way of seeing the world, I'd say be a tattooist. Tattoo your way around the world like I've done. If you've got an art like tattooing at your finger end, the world's your oyster, as the saying goes.
Amazing.
So it's too early, it's a Sunday morning, it's freezing cold. I left my umbrella on the train, but we've come on a little pilgrimage with a really special friend of ours, and it's a pilgrimage for you too, right?
It's absolutely so exciting for me to be here because...
Well, introduce yourself first and then we can, yeah.
Okay. My name is Danielle Boyardi. I'm the guardian and the curator of the very famous Lyle Tuttle Tattoo Art Collection. And as you know, Matt, Lyle was a great ambassador for tattooing, but also he made a lot of pilgrimages in his very long, illustrious career. And he had a wanderlust for tattooing that led him to be starting correspondence and maintaining correspondence. And here he was corresponding with Leslie Burchett, George Burchett's son. And he made a pilgrimage here in 1974.
50 years ago this year.
50 years ago this past summer to purchase and collect what he considered the greatest feather in his cap, being the George Burchett Tattoo Art Collection.
Right. And like, no one really was collecting tattoo history before. I mean, individual people were collecting their own histories, but like Lyle was really the first person, I think, to realize that collecting stuff from these guys that were, you know, going out of business or dying was going to be an important thing for the future, right?
Lyle was definitely a maverick in many ways, certainly from the start of his career in the late 40s. And he started collecting with actually his first tattoo with Duke Kaufman in the States in San Francisco. And, you know, along his career, he really never stopped and took too much of a breather because he just wanted to, you know, push the boundaries. He traveled, as you know, to all 7 continents, you know, to tattoo, to spread the word of tattooing, to learn from different tattoo artists. And he also was collecting a lot of artifacts and ephemera pieces that wouldn't have been of any interest to anybody.
No.
And now, you know, we have eBay collectors today and that, but really the collection that he put together, including the George Burchett collection, it's really a worldwide phenomenon. So I'm very emotional to be here, as you know, because Lyle talked to me a lot about how he corresponded with Leslie and, you know, how he fell in love with everything in the collection here. We were starting to look at a lot of the photos, you and I, of different artifacts and materials and large flash pieces that would have hung
Things
here.
Things were in the window
Things that were right in the windowsill here. So it's super exciting to be here.
So as far as I know, George Burchett himself didn't ever work at this shop. George's shops were all on this road, his main tattoo shops in this part of London. So he started off at 98 Waterloo Road. Around the turn of the century. He was working a little bit in Mile End and some other parts of London before, but his first like name shop was 98 Waterloo Road, under where Waterloo Bridge is now. He went to South Africa for a bit before World War I, came back, had another shop then at 72 Waterloo Road. Then he moved, that was demolished and reconfigured. Then he moved to 125 Waterloo Road, which is opposite the Old Vic Theatre. That part of London was heavily bombed. The station and St John's Church were heavily bombed. The shop itself didn't actually get bombed out, but it was redeveloped when the whole area was redeveloped in 1951 after the war. George died in 1953, around the time that the shop was kind of, you know, coming to the end of its life. And Leslie ran this spot from at least 1954. Up until the 70s when he retired, part of which was, you know, passing on the collection to Lyle. Loads of photos of George. George was like one of the most photographed tattooers in the world and tattoo shops in the world. And all of his photos of his shops are filled with you images and flash and photos and stuff. And you see the same pieces moving from shop to shop to shop. Yeah, and this final spot, this kind of 217 Waterloo Road, that's now a bright purple crystal and fossil shop. Right in the window here, Leslie still had the name G. Burchett. He was always under the name George Burchett because that was a better sell than Leslie Burchett, and with the images in the window. And I'm sure we know that Lyle came here and he must have walked up and seen that amazing frontage of the building.
I know that they corresponded between 1972 and 1974 about Lyle acquiring the George Burchett collection for his art collection.
And he asked for a couple of things initially, just for his museum that he was starting, and then Leslie said, actually, I need to get rid of the whole lot.
So in between 1972 and 1974, Lyle had been corresponding with Leslie, and Leslie talked about being not in very good health. And so at that point, he gets into that he really wanted the collection to stay together. And Lyle was actually planning to come to Europe. He visited 6 countries, I believe, 6 or 7 countries over about 6 weeks' time. And, there was kind of a rush for him to get here because Leslie was concerned about the shop carrying on. And, Lyle, again, was excited just to pull some things I don't think that he realized. Until even many years after he brought the collection back to the United States, all of the amazing artifacts, the early tattoo stencils, the hectograph stencils, the miniatures. And the other thing I wanted to note is that Leslie clearly had some idea that Lyle had a bit of fame. And I think that was part of the reason that he tried.
Him and George are sort of kindred spirits.
Exactly. I was thinking that this morning, that they both were sort of had a bit of media and fame, and he knew that because he was talking about having a tattoo museum, that he could entrust him with the legacy because there was no one else for him to pass it on to. And obviously he knew he had been writing with him also about tattoo machines, and again, the ephemera pieces, the stencils. So, I can't imagine how excited Lyle was to come here.
Yeah, and it was almost even by the 50s, some of the things we know that were hanging in the window here were from 40 years earlier. They were from the 1910s. They were from that first decade of George's major fame, and so this was a bit of a time capsule By the 70s, it was certainly a time capsule.
Yeah.
In the 50s, it was a time capsule. When Lyle came here, the stuff in the window maybe would have been 70 years old, some of it. Certainly 60 years old.
You and I have been looking, too, at some of the different, the reincarnations of the Burchett shops. And I'm pretty sure that in the one photo we looked at last night of the Johannesburg shop, that the very famous tattooed paper man is actually in that shop,
as well.
too.
Which was right here.
It's unbelievable.
In the 50s,
And then in another one of the photos we saw that he's inside, so it's just unbelievable to be here, really.
So this shop featured so you've all heard of the Renaissance of tattooing. One of the things that Lyle Tuttle is credited in starting, right? That was what Time magazine said in response to Lyle's Rolling Stone cover in 1970, that he was the Renaissance of tattooing. The first time that phrase was used, as far as I can tell, the Renaissance of tattooing, was a segment on British TV in 1954, filmed outside this shop.
No kidding.
So 17 years before Lyle was doing the Renaissance of tattooing, this shop with Leslie and actually with Cash Cooper was being already as early as the 50s credited as the Renaissance of tattooing. So I love that connection as well. That Lyle was ahead of his time in loads of ways without even really realizing it, even as he was creating the time,
In some of the video that I took with Lyle around 2018, he talked a lot about the characters, that he got to know through being a tattooer and corresponding with tattooers all over the world. And he would say, be good to tattooing and it will be good to you. And he thought, it's just not right that all the artifacts, and he didn't want things to wind up in dumpsters. And so it really did matter to him to learn about, not just the tattooers he was corresponding with, but about people they learned from and where they got their supplies and things like that. So it was his proudest achievement in his life, he told me in the last days of his life, the collection. he never thought, oh, it was great that he got to be a famous person or Rolling Stone cover or any of that. You know, it was the relationships that he built through his correspondence and travels and adventures and all his wanderlust that made his life. He always said, I feel like I was the luckiest man in the world. Born at the right time also, but always a maverick, and certainly as a tattoo historian and collector and a preservationist, really, for the practice. He just did a tremendous service to tattooing today, being ahead of the curve then.
I mean, we played you some of that Christmas message that George gave that was put out on.
It was wonderful.
On British radio in 1914, and he talks in that address, right, about travelling the world, about how tattooing was good for him, all these same things. So I think like obviously they never met in person, but I bet George and Lyle would have got on.
I think they would have been kindred spirits, because that audio that you played, he sounds very cheeky. He sounds very bright in nature, you know. So.
Yeah. He didn't want to be a busboy or a boot polisher. He wanted to see the world and be a tattooer.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a real kind of day for me so far. It's a real moment. I have been like really obsessed with the story of George Burchett for a very long time. George Burchett, not exactly even self-appointed, like the kind of anointed king of tattooists, who worked from the late 1890s right the way through to his death in 1951 in London. I, at the same time as John Reiter, who wrote an amazing book about Burchett in the back end of the 2010s, called King of Tattooists, him and I stumbled across at the same time the archive that was used to put together George Burchett's Memoirs of a Tattooist, which, for those of you who don't know, aren't actually a memoir. They were written by a man called Edward Spiro under the pseudonym Peter Layton after Burchett died. Rather hastily, really, to sort of capitalise, I suppose, on the back end of Burchett's fame and the obituaries that came out, and with the help of Leslie Burchett, George's son, and Edith Burchett, George's wife, they put together this book, Memoirs, which has become really. It was the book, really, which kind of started everything that followed. It was the real first kind of story of British tattoo history. It was a real kind of marker of a passing of the torch to the following generation. In the years afterwards, the young tattooers in Britain, the Bristol Tattoo Club in particular, realised that they needed to figure what tattooing looked like post George Burchett, and started the Bristol Tattoo Club and the London Tattoo Club to keep tattooing alive after his passing. But the memoirs are largely drawn by Layton from newspaper clippings. Not a lot of George's authentic voice is in there, and there are a lot of mistakes and errors and half-truths and outright misconceptions. But nevertheless, it's been a huge, part of what all of us know or think we know about tattoo history. And so I've been thinking really for the last, probably 15 years, really about what we can, what the real story of George Burchett's life and would tell us, given what we know based on this kind of slightly hastily collected fabrication. And that involved trying to think about his material history, and lots of it is in this archive in Canada that John and I found. But really, the bulk of George Burchett's material of his life, his 50-year tattoo career, was collected and saved by the San Francisco American tattooer Lyle Tuttle in the 1970s, which really, I think, if you're looking kind of historiographically, like one of the major inciting moments of the beginning of tattoo history as a kind of discipline. So there were people before Tuttle who were collecting stuff. Rich Mingins in London is a good example. But Tuttle was the first, I think, tattooer who understood, I guess, that tattooing had a history that needed to be saved. And Lyle Tuttle in 1974 came to England, visited Leslie Burchett at 217 Waterloo Road, the shop that Leslie was running after his father's death, and persuaded Leslie to entrust him with the collection. that body of stuff that Lyle then shared in stories, particularly through his magazine Tattoo Historian, is really the foundation of like what I do and what we do. And so all of that is a preamble to say I'm so grateful to have with us today Danielle Boyardi, the manager, custodian, caretaker of the Lyle Tuttle collection, and of therefore by proxy the George Burchett collection. And we went, we've made some film that I'm sure people will see. We went today to see that shop 217 Waterloo Road, where Lyle would visited in 1974 to bring
Very
this,
emotional.
to bring this stuff. We had a little look at the sites where the previous shops used to be, but yeah, I mean, welcome, Danny. You've been on the show before, but I guess also maybe the best place to start is like, tell us, let's start with that story. Tell us about Lyle coming to London, or even what led up to that, that ended up with this incredible collection being in his hands and now yours.
We've spoken before a little bit about Lyle's history, and not just as a famous tattoo artist, but one of his sort of passions, and perhaps the greatest passion of his life, was collecting. And through this amazing correspondence that he kept with so many artists worldwide, he was constantly trying to push the boundaries of knowledge and learning about where different tattoo artists got their equipment, for example, who brought them into the practice of tattooing. And through him putting together his early configurated tattoo museum in San Francisco, and somewhat through his fame, by 1970, Lyle was famous.
Yeah.
He wasn't just a famous tattoo artist. He was a famous American icon.
He was front cover of Rolling Stone famous.
Absolutely. Yeah. He sort of crossed the boundaries. He would say to me, well, I was at the right place at the right time. And, the truth too is that Lyle, he should be known and remembered as much for being a historian, and certainly a tattoo historian, because he was an extremely well-read person. He didn't have a lazy mind.
Yeah.
He loved tattooing. He would, say to me all the time, I love tattooing for the different outlets that it gave me. He could do machine building. He became a jewelry maker. He was an expert metalsmith. He loved designing. He loved traveling, and he loved to learn. And through the correspondence that he kept with so many people, he developed these opportunities. He had wanderlust, to be tattooing in 1957 in Alaska. And it's that same wanderlust that actually led him sometime in 1974 to make this amazing pilgrimage to Europe. And that was where he was destined, really, to meet with Leslie Burchett. And
I think it's a real kind of testament to his intelligence, because, as I said, there were people that were collecting things slightly, as an artifact of their working practice. But I think he's one of the first, if not the first person, to really think, I'm going to actively think about collecting tattoo history and calling it tattoo history. And so much of, the Memoirs of a Tattooist book came out in 58. An slightly earlier book, also largely based on British tattoo history, had come out in 54. So a lot of what Lyle's generation knew about tattoo history, such that it was the oral histories and some of the material histories that came through those two books. But there's still a decade and a half after those books came out, where people in Britain and some people in America are starting to think, well, actually, we need to preserve this. But Lyle was, I think, the first, or certainly one of the first people to really realize that if he doesn't take on the mantle of keeping it disappears as history. And he realized that there was something to be done, and also that the British story was such an important part of not just British tattoo history, but of British history more broadly, not just American tattoo history, but American history more broadly. So, that move was totally visionary. So he starts collecting in general in the 60s.
I mean, his technically, and we kind of confirmed this together about a year or year and a half before he passed, technically his first thing he ever collected was the business card he got from Duke Kaufman when he got his first tattoo. We found the card. I said, Lyle, I think this has got to be the card. He said, oh, yep, that would be the one.
Amazing.
And so, you know, he loved paper. He loved artwork. He was endlessly fascinated. I mean, on multiple occasions, we would both sit there and have a tear in our eye looking at the business cards. He would say, aren't they something, kid? Yeah. You know, he thought of them as like little candies. I'd say, God, they're just the font, you know, the typography.
Yeah.
And
the moments that they represent of history as well.
Absolutely. And the truth, too, is that for both the American and the British collections, and certainly within the British collection, within the Burchett collection, I should say, there are many pieces of artwork, business cards, little pieces of ephemera that might be the only image or address or historical information for a particular artist.
100%.
And, you know, so he always had an appreciation for details. I mean, anybody that knew Lyle at all, and certainly to see the kind of machines he built and his own artistry, he was a person that was very hyper-focused on details. So he was obviously going to have a deep appreciation for, you know, not just the biggest, you know, boldest piece of flash hanging in the room, but also the artifact in the corner, the stencil.
It's interesting. This is slightly a tangent, I suppose, but him as a tattooer reveals a bit of that, because he was never known really for huge, big, flashy sleeves and back pieces. He was always known for much more intimate work.
He told me actually that, you know, he was pretty sure that he only ever really did one back piece, which was there's a sort of famous photo of Lyle with a ship scene on, I believe the subject's name is Ed Jotz. And he's like, oh, I didn't really like doing that big stuff, you know. He had a wanderlust in all things, and he preferred smaller pieces, you know. Obviously, when, you know, the 90s came and people were starting to do a photorealistic, you know, Sistine Chapel-like scenes in tattooing, I think he you know, he felt a little humbled by the level of artistry that could be done, but he honestly was, he was all about understanding and embracing that the boundaries were going to be pushed
100%.
And the practice was going to be evolved. I mean, at one point, I think in 2016 or 2017, he actually, we met these two young guys who came into San Francisco, and they had, you know, gotten a little scholarship to come there, and they had an electric, like a robot tattoo arm.
Oh, yeah.
And Lyle wanted to be tattooed by that. Yeah. And we do have some video of him getting, you know, tattooed by this robotic arm.
Yeah, that attitude is very common, I think. Or not common, but it's one of the threads that binds people together. And I think we've talked about today already, I think Lyle and George would have been kindred spirits in a way, because they both had a sort of thirst for attention a bit for themselves, but also for tattooing. And they wanted to be ambassadors for tattooing. And through them being famous and visible, they ended up, that's part of the way that their networks built, and they got known, and they shared, like, they understood the value of press and media. And yeah, like that was, you know, that was as much for the love of meeting other like-minded people as it was, you know, the thrill of being in the paper. And I think, I can really sort of see common cause. You know, I spent a lot more time thinking about Burchett than Lyle's career, but you know, speaking to you a lot over the past days and weeks and years, that I can understand that have in common. So anyway, so the first contact, as far as you know, is Lyle reaches out. I guess by this point, Leslie Burchett is kind of getting out older. There's definitely a kind of dropping off in the popularity of tattooing, and certainly in the UK. And Lyle reaches out because he's starting this museum, and he thinks, I'd like a piece of Burchett's stuff in my museum. So initially he reaches out to try and get one or two things for the museum.
You know, I have to admit, Matt, that from the dates, I had looked at a lot of these letters before, you know, in organizing the collection and better protecting some of the paper pieces. And I realized just moments before we went on here that actually it looks to me from the dates like it was Leslie that first reached out to Lyle.
Interesting.
Because the date on this earliest letter seems to be October 27th of 1972.
Wow.
I'll do my best. I can just read a little bit of a snippet of this, but this is on the Waterloo
217 Waterloo Road headed paper.
Yep, on
where
the
we were this
letterhead.
morning.
Yeah, and this is Lyle Tuttle. Due to health and age, I will be finished at this address December next 25th. Anybody interested in buying it all, lock, stock, and barrel, would be welcome. He should like it all to go to in one piece, though, to be preserved. I'll see about sending you something for your museum. And I have some worthwhile photos.
Yeah,
And
do you?
Yeah. And he says, sincerely yours, L. Burchett. And so I think, too, that we were talking a little bit about, Leslie would have known through the grapevine, through, there were so many
certainly
less
by 70,
tattoo
certainly
artists.
by 72, as we said, like that 1970, Lyle was on the front page of front cover of Rolling Stone.
Mm-hmm.
Time magazine talked about that year the tattoo renaissance, calling Lyle the man leading the tattoo renaissance. I pointed out to you this morning that there was a film filmed at that shop in 1954, the year after George died, at Leslie's shop on British TV, titled The Tattoo Renaissance. So Leslie Burchett was leading the tattoo renaissance 17 years earlier. But by that point, as you said, Lyle is globally famous. Actually the interest that comes in amongst British tattooists for the history really doesn't come until the end of the 70s or the mid 70s, really, when British tattooists start going out to America. Ron Ackers and Dennis Cockle, for example, in 1975, 76. Terry Wrigley as well. But as I said, Lyle's the vanguard of all that, and he actually makes it possible. He's one of the people that comes and makes those connections first. And so that letter is presumably maybe Lyle's written and said, I'd like to a couple of things, and Leslie's gone, actually take it all. I'm too old for this shit now. I'm not making any money.
Right.
I want rid of it.
Right. He wanted to travel, I think, too, because Lyle was, known at the time and had started a tattoo museum. The word museum, I think, was sort of conjured. Okay, yes. I can trust Lyle. And Lyle has, already at that point, he was an ambassador for tattooing.
Yeah.
The body shirt was already out. He was in Time Life magazine by 1972. Yeah. And so I think there was a certain, level of trust that was through Lyle's fame, but also through the fact that he wasn't a writer. He liked the idea that he was a historian and having a museum and doing something that at the time nobody was doing, a tattoo museum.
I'm sure Leslie saw something of his dad in him, like in attitude.
Yeah.
So I mean that's incredible. And so then so that's 72. How long did it take for Lyle to make the trip over here? And from what you know, how did that go down?
So Lyle would have been corresponding. There are multiple letters. Leslie is visiting his daughter in Canada between sometime in, I believe, still in 1972. I don't have that particular letter pulled up, but they're clearly corresponding for about 2 years or a year and a half. And then this particular letter, I'll read this one, that Lyle had typed to Leslie, which is funny because Lyle loved to handwrite everything.
We love a typed letter.
But I think that he typed this letter because he thought, okay, like this is serious.
Yeah.
I need to represent the Tattoo Museum well. So this was dated May 7th, 1974. Dear Leslie, I was very glad to hear from you and hope your health is better. Thanks for offering your help to the Tattoo Art Museum. Today is tomorrow's history. I'm interested in obtaining as much as possible everything you're not going to use again. Design sheets, equipment, business cards, photos, write-ups, any type of memorabilia dealing with tattoo artists, tattooed people, and the art of tattooing in general. I'm sure your father won't mind being remembered here in the museum. We have a few sheets of designs now drawn by G.B. Davis. They have a lot of World War I designs. There is also a wooden box that has 200 designs drawn on rolls. Was that your late father? Please let me know what you have for the museum. People have told me that you have a museum in the back of your studio. There were old machines and a lot of photos. All this would be of great interest. We have a machine here in the museum that is in a wooden box that is enclosed with the word patented stamped on it. Someone said your father built and sold that type. I'll close for now, write soon. I'd like to come to England sometime soon. Enclosed are a couple pictures of the museum. I'll send better ones next time.
So did Lyle have a kind of? It wasn't open to the public, the museum at that time. Was it in his tattoo shop?
The museum was at the 7th Street shop on 7th and Market in downtown San Francisco.
Amazing. Yeah. And I think it's so funny because, you know, at that time in England, I'm sure like Leslie Burchett would have been like the old fashioned. Like even if you were a hip tattoo kid in the 60s, and there weren't many of those, there were some, but for most people, it would have been like yesterday's news, like this old out of fashion 30, 40, 50, 70-year-old stuff is not interesting to people in England at the time.
I was thinking too, like, you know, it's funny when you and I, we sort of, you know, you'll say something that'll make me think, oh God, I have this aha moment. And knowing that Lyle, you know, his father, he was a Depression era kid, and they went to Northern California where his father was part of the shipbuilding for World War II in Sausalito. And so Lyle always had an appreciation until he passed. He was obsessed with maritime culture, shipbuilding, you know, early tall ships. There's a very famous photo of him on the Balclutha, you know, which is still now docked in San Francisco there at a Hyde Street pier. And, you know, the point I'm trying to make is that a lot of the artifacts, in particular from World War I through World War II, because Burchett's career it was going to cover pre-World War I all the way through World War II and beyond.
He started 1899 and died in 53 and had these huge big booms in, you know, 14, 18 and 39, 45. Like he's busier than he's ever been. Yeah.
So I think that Lyle, you know, for sure, outside of his interest in the artifacts of tattooing and in seeing images of early British flash, you know, he was very moved and inspired and curious to, you know, to be able to see the things that were in the Burchett legacy and collection, because so many of the pieces were going to focus on, you know, military culture, maritime culture. I mean, as you've seen, I mean, they're breathtaking little vignettes, little scenes of what, you know, would have happened on a battlefield. There are watercolors or hectograph stencils showing, you know, a World War I serviceman carrying someone on his back. I mean, they're very poignant. They're you know, they're as much the storytellers for, you know, that period of history, and you see that so much in tattoo culture that. You know, you there's so much history, social history, military history, political history.
Yeah, I mean, I've said before, you know, if art history as a discipline in general means anything, you know, if we can tell something about the people and places from the art that they made, like if that's true for church art and museum art and country house art, it must be particularly true for the art that people wear on their bodies. And like that kind of poignancy and intimacy is exactly right. So what happens next? So Lyle says, okay.
So Lyle does the trip. He plans the trip. I know that, you know, amongst many other artists, he visited with Herbert Hoffman on that trip. There are a lot of early 70s business cards that are in the collection. He did a whole European trip. He traveled, I'm going to try and get the numbers right here. So he traveled through, I believe, 7 different countries over 6 weeks' time.
Wow.
And
That's a big deal. I mean, I was saying this to you. My dad made a trip from Australia going eastwards. So he went via San Francisco and then to New York and then to London on a ship in 1972 as probably a man about the same age as Lyle, maybe a bit younger, 21-year-old my dad was in the early 70s. And that was it was a big deal. In the days before, like, you know, constant air travel and the days before, like, package holidays, it was expensive. It was time consuming. It was exciting and prestigious, you know, like, you know, yeah, it's not the 50s, but still in the 70s, like making a journey of that kind, of that duration and length is a big, exciting deal.
Lyle always, you know, he's like a kid of wanderlust though, right? I mean, he was an only child. He traveled up to Alaska in 1957 after meeting and working some with Burt Grimm, because Burt Grimm said, you got to get up there, Tuttle. Nobody's tattooing up there. And, there's like one contact in an arcade, and Lyle goes up there. And of course he's making money hand over fist and, putting cash in like the socks of the boots kind of thing, and so he's definitely, he's a pioneer, and the truth too is that he already was fairly well traveled because, he was a military guy. He had been to Korea. He was a Marine veteran in the Korean War between 1951 and 53. He'd traveled extensively through the United States. He had already in 1972 traveled to Samoa and become a Samoan chief there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty extraordinary for a tall white man, tattooed head to foot, to go to a place like Samoa and be getting, back piece there or lower back tattoo work.
I want to do a whole other episode with you about that, because his connection to Davy Jones and tribal tattooing is very untold. But that's for another conversation.
Mm-hmm. Part two, and 3, and 6.
So he comes to England, and the shop now. I mean, so Waterloo had changed a lot. It had been bombed out in the war. It had been demolished and rebuilt in the 50s. It was a real changing moment architecturally in the city, and it must have been a really interesting. I mean, it was sort of end of the swinging 60s, so all of that kind of, so the hippie movement, both in San Francisco and in the UK, was sort of dying out. There was a lot of cynicism and anger and poverty and pollution, and strange place to be. But we walked up to that shop today that in today's London is bright purple and sells fossils. But you can still imagine, as you said, that kind of energy, that excitement that Lyle must have had, either coming from the train station or pulling up in a car for the first time and seeing in the window those things that he would have seen in photos that had been in several of George's shops, even in South Africa, for the past 50, 60, 70 years at that point. And even though this shop hadn't been run by Leslie for a long time, it was a time capsule. And I don't know, like you've spoken to him in person in like those years of his life about that moment of him arriving and seeing this stuff for the first time.
I'm not sure how early into the trip. I suspect it would have been more towards the end of that 6-week trip. But Lyle told me at length, about this sort of, excitable moment where Leslie or he checked in with Leslie by phone call. And they also did communicate with telegrams.
Yeah, wow.
I mean, that's how long ago this is. We were saying, my God, this is 50 years ago.
Yeah.
I was 2 or 3 years old when this happened, not even. But
I was a twinkle in someone's eye.
You were, darling. But I mean to say that, Leslie said to him, well, you've got to get here. And I'm not sure, because now that we see the shop is still standing, right? But Leslie was of the thinking that the wrecking ball, quote unquote, that's what Lyle always said. The wrecking ball is going to come through here tomorrow, and you've got to get here. And so I think he was feeling a tension, like, is this Tuttle character going to come here? And, and he did. And so Lyle told me that he had to rent a car that would have been, in my mind's eye, it's something like a Woody type of a station wagon. And, and started, a lengthy process by himself of,
shuttling
the boxes and the artwork pieces, of getting everything to the port.
There's a lot, right? I mean, we saw today how small that shop is, and I'm going to presume that all of the stuff was in there, because I don't think that Leslie had it in his private house. But there's a lot of stuff, right?
Lyle actually has the Edith her shoe form. He has a lot of artifacts that would have been the Burchett family artifacts. I mean, there are multiple photos. There's much to discover. And so he has a lot of photos that are, pre-tattoo career of George Burchett's travels, before 1900, of him with his brother, early beautiful painted photography pieces, them with the natives during some of their travels. There are many studies, actually, animal studies,
that clearly are these sort of early Audubon type drawings that Burchett was doing.
Yeah, they would have also been. I mean, in the front of one of those shops, there was a reproduction of a painting by Archibald Thorburn, who is an ornithological painter who a lot of the tattooers were referencing. So they were working in the kind of, amongst this artistic scene as well at that moment in time. So Burchett talks about going to Japan and talks about going to North Africa. So let me just get this exactly. This is from I wrote George's entry for the Oxford National Dictionary of Biography, which is the kind of list of all the important people in British history. There's 2 tattooers in there. One of whom is Sutherland MacDonald, the other of whom is George.
You're so legit.
I am so legit.
You are.
So I'll quote myself here. Burchett seems to have become interested in tattooing at a young age, having tattooed his schoolmates, as well as having observed tattooed performers and working tattoo artists at the eclectic London Aquarium. He enlisted into the Royal Navy, and by 1892 he was already tattooed on both forearms. From his first tour aboard HMS St. Vincent, he begun to tattoo fellow sailors aboard ship, and was tattooed in Japan during a spell in port at Yokohama. Deserting his ship in Jaffa, which is in the Middle East, he eked out a living by tattooing Western travellers to Jerusalem, at least so he says, and on returning to England in 1896, on the run from the Royal Navy, because he changed his name to, his real name is George Burchett Davis, and he never used the Davis because he was on the run. Although actually the 1939 census, he's in the census as George Davis.
Lyle's talked a little bit about that.
He has established himself as one of London's premier tattoo artists. He married his wife, muse and finest canvas, Edith, on the 18th of December 1899 in the East End of London, working as a bootmaker in Mile End, just around the corner from here, a profession he picked up during an apprenticeship as a boy. Early accounts suggest that although customers came to get their footwear repaired, many also left with a tattoo. And then he began to work in this bit of town in 1904. So first 98 Waterloo Road, then 72, and then 125. So that accumulation of material by the time Lyle gets there is at least 70, maybe 75 years of stuff. And actually, given that, it seems that his family were there a bit as well, that they just shuffled things up the road. I mean, some of it went to South Africa and back, but I'm amazed that so much stuff was just still in that tiny little shop. I mean, you can see from the photographs of it, and certainly of the previous shops, that it was stuffed full. Like every Barbara Jones, who curated the Black Ice and Lemonade exhibition of British folk art at the Whitechapel in 1951, draws him, and he's surrounded, even right at the last days of his life, surrounded by drawings. And he was working right up to the day he died, doing coronation portraits of Queen Elizabeth, of which we've got some over there we can show in a minute. But there's a lot of stuff, is what I'm saying. So do you have a sense roughly how much stuff Lyle took back to San Francisco?
Well, I mean, I would say it was multiple station wagon loads. I don't know how we quantify that.
Yeah.
But as you know, there are large pieces that we would refer to them as the flash pieces, the watercolor signage pieces, the tattoo artist always in attendance. These pieces that are larger than 15 by 21 in size.
Yeah.
Then there are mid-sized pieces that are watercolors, framed material. I was thinking too that I think Leslie probably was a little bit overwhelmed because there is an abundance of tattoo stencils, which for me, they evoke this ethereal, otherworldly history, to the point that I think they've been underappreciated, for the last 100+ years. Yeah. And for me, they're some of my favorite things.
Yeah. Because they've touched the skin of these people.
Yes. And you have early printing processes, by which these are being done. And, part of that whole chemical process gives the stencils this kind of glow, this kind of, almost like there's a like a shimmer, coming through the ink saturated now in the paper. But Leslie gave Lyle multiple tins inside which there were tattoo stencils organized by design.
Incredible.
So there are multiple geishas. There are multiple leopards and tigers and lions. There are multiple hearts with daggers. Whatever the design was, the same as a tattoo artist would hopefully, organize his stencils and his flash art today. That's what they were doing then.
Yeah.
And they're all multiple sizes. I mean, there are ones that are a third the size of my hand, tiny ones about the length of my finger.
Big pieces.
And then there are larger pieces like this
let's
by 10.
Let's show some of this stuff. So
Sure.
So some of these pieces are a bit larger, like chest piece size, for example, and some of them are, what we might call, say, gap fillers or little bangers.
There are two. I am partial to the hectograph stencils, but there are two of these here, and you can see they have this very, very beautiful violet color ink to them.
I love how these look. Like this technology was still being used up into it's still being used by some people today, but it's still being used up until the 1980s. I mean, even when you hold it up to the light, it just absolutely glows.
And a lot of these earlier stencils too. I want to note
do you mind if I take that out? I'll be very delicate or not.
No, please go ahead.
Sure.
Yeah. A lot of the stencils were done on window shade. These are fabric pieces.
Yeah,
and to my knowledge, it's they're early repurposed materials. I mean, these guys were scrapping it. If they didn't have paper, or maybe they had they might have had this material in the shop, is somehow, because there are numerous stencils that were done not on paper.
The other collection that I know as well is Jessie Knight's, which dates a bit coincident with this late period, and her stuff's all on the back of all kinds of things, wallpaper, cereal boxes, sticky back. I mean, this is beautiful. And I wonder,
that one also has the pencil marks embedded in it.
I was about to say that. You can see where that's been traced over very hard to create the tracing.
Well, I'm certainly no expert on the early printing process. I've read a little bit about this hectograph process, and that the stencils could be reused. And there's a gelatin component to the transfer, such that as the gelatin, you can see there that is the gelatin, in the line work of the ship.
And you can see, you're talking about the organizational structure. So this one in the corner has got A8 written here. So you'd go in, you'd pick A8 from the book or from the wall, and then he'd go and pull out the stencil from the drawer or from the box for A8. And we've all seen this little geisha 1,000 times. It's been redrawn by loads of tattooers for even before Burchett's era. But that is a perfect example of these as working objects, because it's cut out, but that AA is a little index that shows you when it was made. Oh no, sorry, where it was in the file. And this is very thick. As you said, it looks like kind of, it's not quite paper, is it? It's like a kind of a linen.
It's definitely like either window shade or some type of some type of, it could have been maybe like a sail material or something of that nature. These are for sure a fabric. You can see the threads, embedded there.
Well, so we know that many tattooers in this period were buying materials from art supply stores at this place called Cornelissen and Sons, which is still there, buying powdered pigments to mix into ink, and buying very good art paper for flash painting. As well as doodling things on headed paper, but they were buying very good art supplies a lot of the time. But they were also making do. I mean, can you pass me the headed paper one, because this made me so smile. Yeah, we'll move them out of the way.
Which one?
The white one there with the ripped piece right in front of you. So this makes me so happy, because again, in the Jessie Knight collection as well, there's lots of these things that are planned and drawn and painted and finished, and then there's things like this
happenstance
on a ripped piece of paper, where 27 Waterloo Road. So we know this is by Leslie, not by George, but someone's come in and said, "I want some swallows," and he's gone something like this, and he's just sketched it out on a little bit of scrap paper. And one of the other things really interesting about this is it's very difficult to sometimes know.
You can sort
all
of
the time
tell by the
who
hands
painted what,
that
yeah.
that is not a Burchett hand. That's
Yeah.
probably more Leslie's
Well,
work.
it definitely will be, because it's on this paper. It will definitely be Leslie. But you get a sense that he can draw. I didn't realize he could draw this well.
Mhm.
This is nice. This is, you know, he's clearly a bit shaky and a bit late in his life in terms of his penmanship here. But like, that's a beautiful, pretty little thing.
Yeah, I love that as an
and a little
artifact.
moment of customer artist interaction where someone's come in and gone, oh, I really would like, you know, like today, the custom, I like this, and they've gone, here, something like this. And that you showed me so many fantastic things today and over the time I've known you, and I'm so blessed. But this made me really happy yesterday, because I love these little moments of kind of just very quick and very kind of serendipitous pieces of sketching that show the live work of a tattoo shop in this period.
There, in with the paper stencils, there are multiple little packets also of, you know, source material, inspirational studies.
Beautiful.
That are little pieces of from magazines or, you know, newspaper clippings and drawings that in many cases, George and Leslie were actually drawing or adding something to that particular piece.
Right.
And then you can see that piece was the inspiration for, you know,
so they're downloading
larger
from
things.
Pinterest is cutting out of a magazine
the Pinterest of the day.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, we were talking to both this morning and yesterday about how, you know, Lyle would say, you know, tattoo art is the art that art history forgot.
100%.
And through the lens of so many of these pieces, you can sort of track also the movement that, you know, through tattoo art, they were into naturalism. You know, they were into Orientalism. You know, there are later stencils even that you can tell were done in the late 40s or early 50s that are little rock and rollers with guitars.
Yeah. Jesse Knight's got some like Beatles kind of guys with bowl cuts. I mean, I think, so George never sold like big production sheets of Flash as we know them today, but he did make individual stencils for sale for a long time with tattoo machines.
I didn't know that.
Around, but I don't think he ever made production sheets and Flash. So much of this stuff is kind of hybridized, customs / you know, redrawn. I mean, this is gorgeous.
This one I wanted to show too. I mean,
please.
this is it's such a particular, you know,
I love this
it's
so
sketchy but
much.
spectacular. This is for sure a World War I period tattoo stencil done. Again, this is on window shade. You can see even a little bit of the little fabric threads kind of cutting through there.
It's got a little bit of that stiffness, a little bit of that, And as you said, that would probably be reused on multiple customers.
So this is what's
interesting about this? Look at the flags. Flags are empty. So when your customer tells you what country they're from, then you fill the flags in afterwards.
Tom brought in that point yesterday, and I actually hadn't thought of that because there are multiple stencils that don't have the sort of design or the cross or the
stars and stripes,
the information filled in. There are a lot of this type of I refer to them as the victory goddess. Designs.
The books that I was showing yesterday from Japan from the same time have the same trope that many of them have these empty flags, because that also shows you that this is for reuse, actually, thinking about it, because if this was for one customer, it would have the line work for the specific flag that this customer wanted, maybe a British flag and an American flag, or a French flag and not an Italian flag. That wouldn't be right, would it? But it would be a kind of, actually, World War One, maybe it would do. But anyway, it would have the kind of specific ones for this design. The fact it's blank shows you it's for reuse, because he can then, next time he uses it, just freehand you in a different flag. Phenomenal.
I'm just going to keep it kind of passing over pieces here. I mean, they're little, tiny little treasures. That's
1920s.
I love her too. Again, you can go ahead.
She's incredible. That one, not even likely. That was definitely traced from a magazine, isn't it? Or a photograph. Maybe that's actually from a photograph of a real person, but most likely from a magazine. Burchett was involved frequently in this magazine called London Life, which was a magazine of sort of fetishism, actually, really, but quite coded. It wasn't overtly like, hey, perverts, buy this magazine, but it would have very in-depth stories about like what's happening in women's wrestling, or like updates in like footwear.
Our friend Paul King has brought me into a little bit of the history of London life.
Yeah.
Lyle doesn't have any, unfortunately, in his collection.
So these kind of photos would be, these sort of women would be in London Life, but they'd also be, they'd also be in Women's Weekly and Ladies' Home Journal and all of the kind of print culture of the time, and very quick and nice work for a tattooist to trace and use. And I love, and I've talked about this a lot when I've talked about the art history of tattooing, is that the way the medium works, particularly in this early period when the technology doesn't allow you to get quite as much detail as people can get now, you have to dilute or really kind of boil down the emotional content of a piece to a few lines. And to get the kind of emotional, romantic power in like as few lines as possible is basically the task. And all of the best tattooers in history, in my opinion, are able to do that. It's what Taylor Jerry and the people that Taylor Jerry lifted from, like Brooklyn Joe Lieber, are so good at. But you can see here what Burchett's done, for example, like just rather than lining the bottom lid, just 3 little dots to give that little bit of softness, little bit of tenderness, little bit of youthfulness in a way that is very, very artistically complex, but really kind of, it's the kind of thing that's going to work on the skin in the medium of a tattoo. It's beautiful and very, very hard to do. And the difference between, there's a whole section of my PhD thesis about this actually, the difference between, you can give the same flash design or the same line work design to 10 different tattooists. It will come out different every time, depending on how they work. This is such a good example of how good an artist Burchett is, because that little detail of like, and even like, see on this eye here, there's just a little gap. The line isn't contiguous along the bottom lid. That's a real clever trick artistically to give a little sparkle, a little bit of life, a little bit of humanity.
A little space, a little negative
Most people who tattooed this image would do a straight line across there. He's a good enough artist and knows enough about how this is going to look in the skin that he needs to leave a tiny little gap there. That is very, very difficult to do. It's the kind of thing that Ernie Bushmiller, the cartoonist who did Nancy, was very good at, leaving just little empty lines, breaks in lines to create space and depth and movement. It's very difficult for a lot of people to do, and that is such a good example of how brilliant Burchett is. Wonderful. Gorgeous.
There's also, I was just thinking as you were saying that too, the fine line work, even in like, the details of dresses, or, here the curls of her hair. It's just really pretty extraordinary.
It's give us some specs. This could be a self-portrait, Dan.
I don't know.
Think, like...
Maybe. Yeah. Yeah. I pulled 3 other pieces here that are maybe similar in the period. We don't want to forget we have this. This one is done on paper. I'm sorry. Got to turn it around here. This is the reverse of the image, and this is a World War I mariner, I would say.
Yeah. Drawn backwards.
HMS, yep. So that's the mirror image of what would have been the tattoo. And there are multiples of this period design. Ones that say India, ones that are evocative of earlier war periods.
You definitely have North African campaign, Egypt, you see a lot.
There's one actually that also from the same period has German cruiser sinking.
Yeah.
And there's a whole kind of scene of what would have been happening there. This piece is similar in a way.
I love that this is drawn backwards, because that is exactly what you draw it backwards and you trace over it, and then your stencil's the right way around.
You can see the pencil work on that one too.
Yeah.
So
I'm so blind. That is so So that's drawn in pencil, sketched over in pen, and then you'll make then the hectograph by painting over this, and then because it's backwards, then the hectograph will be positive to print it on the skin. That is incredible, actually, to draw that backwards. I love that so much. Wow.
This one's super fragile too. She looks almost pre-World War I. You had a note you said something about this one yesterday. Rex Stoker, 1950.
Yeah, I don't know. That may well be.
So could that have been another artist that was in the collection?
It could be an artist. It could be the customer. It could be...
Because she sure seems earlier than 1950, right?
Yeah, but Rex, so you can see it's got pinholes in it, so it's definitely been pinned up. I don't know, maybe we should Google this, whether Rex Stoker was the name of an artist who drew this kind of thing, or whether Rex Stoker is the customer, or or Rex, who was a stoker, because stoker's a job in the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows? More Googling to be done there.
That could have been an early one in his own collection, though, too. I mean, there definitely were other pieces by other artists that found their way into
100%.
the Burchett collection. So
yeah,
that's a good example of that one.
But yeah, as you said, definitely been pinned up because it's got pinholes on it, and it's been pinned for a while because you can see the discoloration around the pinholes. Gorgeous. This
one
I love.
This one is a real little, painted watercolor treasure.
With a Danish flag.
Yep. So that's the Danish flag. There's a little sinking ship in the background there. And down in the corner here, there's a little GB. So obviously done by Burchett, we'll assume at least. And it has a very charming, shaking hands, a sailor's grave.
So the King of Denmark was tattooed, Frederick the Ninth, and famously, used to get wheeled back from the tattoo shop in Neuhaven in a wheelbarrow. Burchett at least claimed to have tattooed him. I don't know how true that is, but there was definitely claims that that tattooed king was tattooed by the king of tattooists. And so this is the kind of thing, right? The Danish thing, and then we've got here at the top this LA, and that again is very likely, we think, an index card marker to go and find the stencil. This is lovely.
There's something on the back of that too. It almost looks like it would have been done on the piece of there's little houses or something.
Yeah,
so
that's a Chinese pagoda.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So there's a Chinese pagoda on the back. Which camera do I want? This one. There's a Chinese pagoda on the back there. So this is maybe an old painting of his that he's cut up to reuse the cardboard.
That's happened in multiple other cases too. You see that he's reused certain pieces, and I think it's in the.
You can see how discolored it is from the cigarette smoke as well.
I actually love that about.
It's gorgeous
about this material.
Absolutely gorgeous. Yes, we got we've got some roll we'll put in as well, but yes, we visited here today, or this where it was. It's now a Oaxaca.
This is a postcard with greetings and best wishes from the Old Vic, by bus or train to Waterloo. Yeah,
so that's the 125 shop where George died. So just here. In the middle of the and so the 217 shop where we were is just a bit past the Old Vic. That whole block is now redeveloped, but as we said, handy for the fire station over the road, handy for the Union Jack Club, which was there earlier on, handy for the train station, of course, and handy for the Old Vic. So if you were coming out of the theatre, or you were coming out of the pub, or you're getting the train home, or you were going out to World War II, wandering down, popping in, seeing George at 125 Waterloo Road.
It mattered so much. We were talking about this walking through the rain today, how the business acumen of the tattoo artist was really very important. Of course, you had to be a good artist, but just as much, you had to know how to run a business, and you had to know how to attract customers, be in the right place at the right time. Lyle talked so much about Burt Grimm and his business acumen and what he learned from him. And so in many things you're saying about, Burchett and George Burchett and Leslie, I'm hearing that they had so much common ground, actually. And actually, they both visited. You mentioned Burchett visiting Yokohama.
Yeah.
And Lyle was also in Yokohama.
Yeah.
Not a lot of people know that he tattooed and traveled to Japan just after he was in the Korean War. And he would say, "Oh, those are some of these tattoos are the drunken Yokohama tattoos, your travel stamps, the markers that you would get to memorialize a trip, and those are the things that the time can't take away from you, right?"
I mean, you see even in this photo, like how much of the block around it was bombed out, and like so much around the station was bombed. I don't know exactly the kind of like reconstruction and raid history of this in the detail that I'd need to say this for sure, but it's very plausible that all this stuff could have gone up in a bomb. You know, like it's only a kind of matter of certainly of tens of meters where bombs were falling near this building, where this stuff could have all been lost forever. And I really hope that Sutherland MacDonald's material survived and was out of his shop, the building that his tattooing was in, and which was also bombed during World War II. But I don't know. It's very possible. None of that really is surfaced. That's the white whale of my career, actually, MacDonald's stuff. But it's very possible that the building that he did tattoo in his whole career, the Hammam Turkish Baths, was hit by a German bomb. I think he'd retired by then, and therefore hopefully his stuff wasn't in there, but none of it, we've never seen any of it, so maybe it all went up in that bombing. So the fact this also survives at all, given the kind of number of, it wasn't like MacDonald, who worked in one shop his entire life. Burchett worked in 4 shops on the same road, 4 of which were bulldozed, redeveloped, knocked down, bombed out. He also worked, as we talked about today, in private studios doing makeup. So he was moving stuff around. He was in different places. Stuff had to get picked up and moved, and in a weird way, it's a miracle that this stuff survived, and the stuff that was in one place, seems not to have done. So again, it makes it, seeing photos like that and walking through this part of town, which is almost unrecognizable, makes the survival of these the buildings, these fragile bits of paper were in, didn't survive, but these bits of paper and these fragile little pieces of drawing have survived is very precious.
Well, we could talk all day. I mean, it's very easy to get emotional on this trip because this trip came up out of the blue for us, but I knew that there were going to be so many connect the dots moments between us also, because there are things that I know about the Burchett collection that, I could share with you. Yeah. And in so many cases, things about the history of London and this collection and the Burchett family that you would then share with me.
Yeah.
And, it's an important collection for many reasons, the Burchett collection, because you see that, outside of even tattoo history, there's so many little details of history, period.
Yeah.
That are preserved through these artifacts, and it comes to mind that I should say thank you, Lyle.
Yeah,
and
thank you, Lyle.
And Lyle would be tickled pink, that we're here together, that we're sharing, that we're collaborating, because that was really what he was all about, was learning from his contemporaries and learning from their histories and.
Well, I mean, my new book, which you've seen, like a big part of the story of that is these connections between London and California, because for some reason, the historical and artistic tendrils seem to span the generations. Like there is something interesting about those links between what's happening in California, what's happening in San Francisco. Tom Riley's co-worker from Japan, Horitoyo, ends up in San Francisco. Like there's over 120 years of collaboration between tattooists in San Francisco and tattooists in London, and Lyle and Ed coming this way, and people like Ron Ackers and Dennis Cockle going to San Francisco, and then Lal Hardy and others, Jim Silis and others going to San Francisco in the 80s. Like that connection, which I think Lyle, really is one of the most important, probably the most important cog in the 20th century. Like that connection sustains the whole edifice of what I'm able to do for a job. So I'm very grateful to it. I guess we should probably just look at the last couple of things, but I wanted to, you've got one more picture of another shop, sadly not there anymore. This is I think the 98 Waterloo Road shop. But again, you can look in the windows of this shop. This is from the really early part of the 20th century, and see things that survived into the second and third shops and into Leslie's shop and now are in their collection. So the window displays and the things that George in particular wanted to showcase as his proudest moments almost are very repetitious through his career. Yeah.
There are at least two pieces in this particular one. There's, the large piece of flash here. There's a lion and flags all around the lion.
Yeah.
That's one of the more famous large flash pieces in the Burchett collection. And this piece too, that is, I can't remember the script, but it's, tattooing. And then there are subject photos at the bottom and flash designs around the top. It's actually a collage. And that particular piece is in at least 3 or 4 of the photos, both inside one of the shops that we looked at yesterday and
there's
and
a piece by Burchett
window.
that's just like very damaged, which is but is in the Jesse Knight collection that says tattooing the practice of a lifetime, which I really like, but it's got a big chunk missing from it.
There's one more little beauty here we forgot about.
This is incredible.
Too. Something else I wanted to say is that, tattoo artists of today, I think,
gorgeous.
Lyle is a guru, a folk hero, an icon for them. But, when Lyle was a young man, when he came and met Leslie, he would have been 42 years old.
Yeah.
And
same
so
age, same age as me, roughly, yeah.
Oh.
I'm 43.
I'm
44.
He had his heroes too, is my point, He was, he wasn't always an 85-year-old man, right? I mean, he traveled the world. There were people he looked up to. People can't believe, and I said, that person tattooed Lyle. Lyle worked with Ralph Johnstone.
I guess it's also worth saying, actually, I just realised in terms of that, the timing is 74 is also just after, I think I have to check the exact dates, but it's basically either just after or just before Les Goose dies as well. So it's another passing of a really important pivotal figure in this post-war period, another big important collecting person. I think Les Goose dies in 74.
There's correspondence between them, but I know for a fact that Lyle, I'm 99% sure Lyle never met Les.
No, I'm pretty sure that he died probably that same year, probably before. I'd have to check that exactly.
I bet he would have visited him had he been alive.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure he would have.
Because that's also this, as you talk about heroes, is that's how Les was, his hero was Joseph Hartley. And he was also kind of, idolizing the prior generations of tattooers. There is a whole series of correspondence in the 30s of loads of tattooers in England saying, well, tattooing's gone to the dogs now. There's no good tattooers in the world. Like, it's all gone to shit. And then Joseph Hartley says, no, there are some real good young tattooers coming up. These people that have a different life to what we had in our era, but they're gonna be good. And certainly one of the people he's thinking about, definitely is Les Goose. And like, again, I think that I hadn't quite put that together until just a second, but that moment of him coming here in 74 is also really important because it's also when Les Goose passes away. And again, another generational change in the history of tattooing and the history of tattoo collecting, because Goose was a very important, he was a collector in a different way, but he was also a kind of, he kept records and he shared information. So yeah, that's super interesting. Wow.
You want to take that last one out?
Yeah, so this is what I love about these kind of things, this is another one that's been pinned. So this is a jockey and horse, right? And number one, there's one of these in those Japanese flash. Although the Japanese tattooers labelled it zebra, which makes me laugh so much. It's clear he's never seen a zebra. But these designs again go back to the early 20th century, and they're the kind of tattoos that, to me, indicate a tattoo tradition beyond the sailor and the soldier. This is the kind of middle class. A lot of people who owned racehorses had this tattoo. People who love to bet on the horses probably got them too. But this is the kind of tattoo that hints to a tattoo history beyond the sailor and the soldier. This is the landsman tattoo. This is the kind of thing that speaks to tattooing beyond the kind of things that people normally imagine. And I love these. You see these jockey shots and greyhounds often as well. In a lot of certainly Edwardian period stuff, because that's when the people who really owned racehorses and owned stables were getting tattooed a lot more than later on. Again, I don't know exactly when this was from. It could be from any period, I suppose. But again, a really interesting thick paper, definitely been pinned up in the shop. but a good kind of example of like something bigger in tattoo history than just, we all love the sailor and sailor stuff, but this is a sort of little hint beyond itself.
And that's an iconic design too. I mean, I would love to get that design tattooed with the horseshoe and a kind of a good luck talisman, right?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have much luck on the horses. I don't know. Do you?
No. But it's very charming, and I love too that they just use just one or two colors.
Yeah.
And like you say, he did a lot of detailing. That's very minimal, but very effective.
Yeah, and
right?
Ed Hardy points out, that these guys learned this from Japan, right? Like ink painting and watercolor mimics as closely as possible how tattoo ink's going to sit in the skin. If you paint in biro or felt pen or oil paint, it doesn't work the same way. It doesn't have that motion, that fluidity that tattoo ink has in the skin. And so the use of watercolor and ink is something that the Japanese flash painters are doing, and which seems to be where it comes into the European tradition, and that's a really good example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, look, we could I'm sure we will keep talking all day, but like I, having been, as I said, like so myself, kind of, well, it was really the kind of really noticing things didn't make sense in Memoirs of a Tattooist after I did my PhD, and I was like, well, that doesn't seem to actually be true. And then it revealed the fact that the book wasn't actually a memoir, and that there was much more behind the story of that book and of Burchett's life. That's been a big obsession and was a big learning moment for me, and very influential. And so it's such a thrill just to handle, and even just to see and handle things that were were in the hands, on the bodies of those people that came before us, and also that a collection that started as I said, Lyle's magazine, Tattoo Historian. Like, there was no such thing before him, and I get to be a tattoo historian. I couldn't be if it wasn't for Lyle being an excited, entrepreneurial, brave, reckless, swashbuckling, talented, clever man. And I feel so grateful and honored to be in the presence of this slice of that collection, and of you. Thank you as well, because I know you've also taken on the mantle of looking after this collection, and are doing an amazing job. So thank you as well, Danny. But thank you to Lyle, and thank you to George. And like, it's been a really beautiful day to bring these things like within inches of where they last were 50 years ago this year. So thank you.
Yeah, there were quite a few breathtaking moments for me today, for sure. I mean, this was a certainly a minor pilgrimage, that I've done compared to what Lyle did in his very long, illustrious career. But again, this is a real, it's an honor and a pleasure for me to bring a lot of these artifacts here and to share them with the two of you, which will then be shared with, tattoo artists out there and history lovers and appreciated. And this is, I think, Lyle, of course, would be proud that some of these little show and tell treasures made their way here, that we got to, have the journey we did this morning in the rain. And it's a very full circle, is I think how I'd like to close. It's a great satisfaction and an honor for me to be here, and to continue to learn more, share more information, and there will be more. There'll be more happening here in the UK, I'm sure.
Yeah, we've loved to have you, and yeah, again, thank you. I'm honoured and touched in a way that I can't adequately express. So thank you so much, Danny. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us.